Hello and welcome to another episode of Winners Only Club, the #1 podcast in the Hamptons and beyond. This podcast is for business owners and entrepreneurs, people who have this winning mentality despite going through defeats and failures. Today our guest is Colin Ambrose of Estia's in Bridgehampton. Everyone welcome Colin.
Hi. I'm Colin Ambrose, Estia's Little Kitchen on the Bridgehampton Sag Harbor Turnpike, just outside of Sag Harbor. Welcome to Estia's.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. What a pleasure it is to have you on the show.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm really happy you came here to Estia's to do this. You'll notice that there's a little crowd noise in the background. It's breakfast.
Yeah.
We open at 9 and we get things started here early as we can.
Yeah.
And it's been our routine for over 25 years.
Yeah, I always think it's good to go to the person's place, like the guest's place, to really show them in their element. Like with Hildreth, I did it at the department store. With Grinning, I did it at her art gallery. And with you, I'm doing it at your restaurant. How many hours a day do you think you spend at this place?
Every day is different. Every day is different. I like to start my day here. I try to get here sometime around 7 o'clock in the morning, and I touch base with my core team. My cooks arrive around then, and I get a sense of where we're at. I like to see who comes in to work. We have a long-standing crew here, and if they don't show up to work, it's because something's going on in their life that's gotten in the way. And I want to be of service to them before I even open the door. That's a primary concern for me. If their life is good, then the restaurant thrives. If there's challenges in their life, it's my responsibility to step in and deal with that first and make that a priority. So, there's a balance in any business. And I think it really starts with your core people.
Your story of origin. Where did you come from and how did you get to Bridgehampton, New York?
Okay. Well, I have a long and winding path. My father was in the grain business, and so he was in, it was almost like the military. And I was born in 1959 when my parents were in their mid-20s, and my dad had just, my dad was a graduate of Dartmouth, and because he was accepted in Dartmouth in the ROTC, he had to go right into the military, so he went to the Marines. He was in Quantico, Virginia, and then he got a job with ConAgra, or Nebraska Consolidated Mills at the time, and I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he was running a mill.
Very cool.
And we were then transferred to Indianapolis, Indiana, where he ran another mill. And then we were moved to Buffalo, New York, where he ran a shipping division for that company. And then we were moved to Omaha, Nebraska, where he worked at the headquarters. And then when I was 5, all of this before I'm 5, we moved to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where he ran a mill and a shipping port. And then we moved back to Omaha, and at the age of 8, we moved to Chicago, Illinois, where he then went to work for another company and worked at the Chicago Board of Trade. So he went from the execution side of the grain business to the futures and trading side, and he had that job for a long time. So I lived in Chicago all the way through my formative grade school years and my high school years. And then I went to school in Utah. I went to Utah State University, and it took me a little while. I was there for 7 years, so I didn't have the normal college run. I did a lot of skiing, but I really got into the restaurant business there. That's when I became aware that my particular nuances in life, shall we say, I have ADD and attention, it needs to be spread out. You know, I don't focus on micro things very well, but I can spread it out really well.
You're the bigger picture guy.
All the time. I'm better with 4 or 5 balls in the air. And so I learned that as a bartender in a funny little place called the Foxhunter Lounge, which was, you know, in a Best Western hotel. And I was basically working at that time in order to pay for my skiing.
Oh.
Yeah, and the skiing in Utah is absolutely the best in the world. And I was very lucky to spend all that time there. Got out of school with a degree in advertising design, wanted to get into the magazine business. Couldn't find a job. I moved to Connecticut, and I was able to find a job at a restaurant called Rory's in Darien, Connecticut, where there are a lot of media people moving around. And I happened to find one day at my bar, about a year in, 2 guys that were talking about starting a magazine for the restaurant industry. And they were the only people in the room. And so I couldn't avoid the conversation, and I said, hey guys, if you want somebody to help you out, I'm available. I just work here, you know, in the afternoons and the evenings. I can give you every morning. They hired me with no pay, and I stayed with that company for 7 years. We started a magazine called Top Shelf. The magazine went to every bar and restaurant in the country. We were the first people to access government lists because of the Freedom of Information Act.
Very cool.
We created a database of 360,000 bars and restaurants across the country through accessing the permittee lists in each state government. And we created a media vehicle called Top Shelf that was specific to beverage alcohol. So all the editorial was about how to make more money behind the bar, which was, you know, I had my 1,000 hours in. In the next 7 years, I got my 10,000 hours steeped in the focus of how to make money in the beer, wine, and spirits world, and then of course the food world, because it was within the confines of what we call the on-premise industry, which is bars and restaurants. And so really I started at the age of 18, and I left that company, went to work for a big corporation, the Hearst Corporation, and I was working on a magazine called Connoisseur, which I was their beverage specialist. That magazine was shut down about a year after I joined, and in 1990 I had a severance check for $8,000. I was 30 years old, and I realized that it was time for me to become entrepreneurial. And so I found my new wife, who we were married for 3 months at the time, had family who had a home in East Hampton, and I knew she was happy here, and that she, you know, would find a place with me here. And I found a restaurant in Amagansett, showed the woman my severance check, and she was in a position where she wanted to sell.
Yeah.
So I was able to buy a restaurant on Main Street in Amagansett with a check for $8,000. She took back a note, and I opened 10 days after we did the deal with her staff, her menu. I had no money, so I had to make it work with what I had.
Yeah.
And over the next 3 years, we were able to pay that note down and eliminate it, and craft this Estia that was mine. Now, I bought Estia from a Greek family.
Oh.
Estia, as I understand it in Greek, is a term for hospitality. The Greek goddess of hospitality is Estia. And there are cafes and such all the way across Greece called Estia. That's like it's a common term, Estiatoria. And so I started off with Greek, but it turned into something that was more mine as the years went by. And one day, a guy said to me, hey, you know, I figured out what Estia means. And I said, please tell me, because I mean, I bought it and I'm working with it. And he goes, it means established in Amagansett.
Perfect.
And there I was, 177 Main Street in Amagansett. And I stayed there for 17 years.
How old were you when you moved from Tennessee to Idaho?
To Indiana. I was, probably 18 months old.
Oh, okay, so...
Yeah, all of those moves happened. Literally, I'd come home from school as a little boy. There would be a moving van in the driveway, and I'd be on a plane going and waking up. Can you imagine? 6 years old.
Yeah.
I didn't know what Puerto Rico was. I smelled it. Literally, when you land in the airport in San Juan, and you step off the plane, you become aware of, your senses tell you you're in a very unique place. Yeah. And that's one of my fondest memories, was that first breath of salt air and the flavors that were in the air in the airport. I mean, literally, there's a whole, the melting pot that takes place right there at the airport. Yeah. Especially in the mid 70s, early 70s, it was beyond, and that happened several times in my childhood, where I'd wake up in a place that I never even knew existed, and I had to figure it out with my sisters, and they didn't always want to figure it out with me. I have an older sister and a younger sister.
You bought Estia from a woman in Amagansett, and then you bought the name from a Greek.
Well, she was a woman, Greek family.
Oh, so that's one thing.
That's one thing, and then what they did was, when I say they, it was a family. Her sister and brother-in-law were in the kitchen. Her nephew ran the kitchen. Her nephew, John Papadopoulos.
Oh, okay.
So they were able to move out of Amagansett, get a lease in East Hampton, and establish the John Pappas Cafe.
Interesting. What's the name of the restaurant that used to be Estia's now? What's there now?
What's there now? It's empty. Okay. It was once called it was Estia. Then the fellow that bought it from me made it into a jazz club. That was a component of it. He bought the bar next door, which used to be called McKendry's, made that into a jazz club. That had a 5-year run. Then he sold that to the guys that are from the Bostwick's enterprise, and they made it into something called the Indian Wells Cafe, I think it was called. And that they had about a 10-year run there, and then it became, I don't know, a Main Street Tavern, I think it was called, and now it's going to become something else. I had a 17-year run in that facility. And so I like to think that, the breakfast, lunch, and dinner program that served the community, that was specific to a price point that was available for everybody, from the retiree in Amagansett to the local plumber to the rugby team from Montauk, that also accepted and encouraged summer visitors. That was my formula, and it still is. I try to keep my price point at a point where I can continue to service my staff and keep my business open, but I don't go to the point where I'm excluding the guy that walks in the door and wants an egg sandwich.
Yes.
I mean, we don't have egg sandwiches on our menu, but we'll make it for him if he comes in and is looking for that.
Colin's quite the breakfast concept connoisseur, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I heard on another podcast, I believe it was Tim Ferriss, he said that whatever you do, just make sure that you do a world-class job at it. Whatever it is that you do, let's say if you are operating a newspaper in a small town in Wisconsin, are you the world-class? Are you the best at doing that specific thing? So I ask you, what makes you the best at what you do?
What makes me the best at what I do is, I think that the very top of the list is that I have pride in what we've created here, and the key word is we. I have people that have worked here. There's a woman in my kitchen that has worked here since the day I opened.
Wow.
Yeah, she started out as the salad cook, and she continues to make salads and dressings for us 6 days a week. So I take great pride in that. I take great pride in the facility that we've created. Now, I own this property. That was one of the reasons why I made this my second location in the Hamptons. I had a lease on the property on Main Street, and I knew the opportunities that existed out there were best if I was to be the owner of my next business and not have a landlord. Because landlords don't always see the needs of the business the way the operator does. And in this case, I've been able to cover both sides of that coin. There's a professional piece to that. There's also great pride in the property, which when we got here was simply a gravel. Literally, the woman I bought this place from was in her mid-80s when I bought it. And she had set herself up very well because she had a piece of property that had required very little maintenance. It was a gravel parking lot, 1 acre with a 2,700 square foot building in the middle of it. I saw opportunity in that because I knew that I could develop with soft goods the property. And so what you see now is gardens with brick and stone pathways, all created by me and people that work with me. I've designed the whole thing. I've had help from customers. Susan Moyer, for instance, is no longer in this neighborhood, but she was a regular customer who I asked to help me lay it out, and she did a beautiful job. And we can park 65 cars on the property. We only seat 40 people, but we can park 65 cars on the property. We've created garden beds that are supported by compost that we make out of our kitchen and off of our garden property. It's a cycle that happens on a yearly basis. Each of the garden beds hosts a different plant or vegetable every year.
So all the ingredients come directly from?
Oh no, not all.
Oh, okay.
But a lot. But we do have a seed to plate program. It's more evident in this, obviously during the season.
Yeah.
In the evening, we serve dinner 2 nights a week, and a lot of our specials are born out of my garden.
Very cool.
I don't ever want people to think that I am serving every customer product out of my garden, because that would simply be a lie, and I can't operate on that basis. But I do communicate with and purchase from a lot of farmers who are my friends. I've been here for 32 years. I've been a member at Quail Hill Farm for 31 years.
Where's that?
Quail Hill is the first CSA, Community Supported Agricultural Program, in New York State, and it's in Amagansett.
Oh, okay.
I would be happy to make an introduction to that team, because Leighton, who runs that operation, is a dynamic farmer. She's been with that operation for 10 years. And it's several hundred acres, and you buy a membership and you become responsible for harvesting the food that you're going to bring to your table 2 times a week.
So that sounds like a winner to me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, I think of myself as a work in progress. Winner is a word that I'll let other people use, but I think we have a success here based on a team effort, and I'm proud of that.
When it comes to the definition of winner, because the name of this podcast is called Winners Only Club, what's your definition of a winner, and what's your definition of a loser?
Wow. Well, my definition of a winner would be someone who has pride in what they do, primarily. I think that in business, it's important that you don't see it as a job. And I don't see this as a job. This is what I do in my life. My children are proud of me, I think. And so I think that's fundamental in the definition. My wife, I believe, is proud of me. I do the best I can for my family, and because I work every day and I have a business that is embraced by the community, I'm able to walk with my head high down the street. So maybe that's a definition, I think, you know. I have a lot of friends here. I know people based on what they need here. I don't know all of their names, but when they walk in, I often know what their needs are. I know what they're going to order. I know what they need in terms of the hug, that the hospitality. Some people don't want to know. Some people just want to be fed and go. I respect that. Others want to have contact with the owner. Some only want to speak Spanish with my staff. I'm good with that. We have Americans that come here that speak Spanish with my staff because that makes them feel like they're a part of. And that's what happens here. Everybody has their reason for coming here, and I hope it's more than just a hot burrito.
Where's your staff from?
Well, primarily they have immigrated to this country from Mexico, and that's why there's that flavor profile here.
Got it. And the second part of the question was, what's your definition of a loser?
I guess my definition of a loser, it would be people who haven't found pride in them, in themselves, and I think that that it's really important to wake up in the morning with a plan, and to wake up in the morning feeling like you're going to accomplish something. It doesn't matter what it is, even if it's a workout, if it's a walk on the beach, if it's planting a garden and seeing the garden go from the seed to the pickle jar. You know, the process, I think. So people that don't have process in their lives, I think that they're missing something. To call them a loser, I don't think would be nice or fair. I don't like that term, but I do feel that process is the fundamental base of moving forward in life.
Process and progress.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I think, and I tell my kids this, and I hope they hear it, that it's really important to balance your life. And I do that by creating things in my life, like the garden, like my fishing show, like, you know, entertaining at home, designing my own personal space in my home, which is something I take pride in. I have a cave at my house, and I really love it. I feel comfortable there. So those kinds.
A real actual cave.
Well, it's basement.
Oh,
yeah, it is.
Nice.
You know, I mean, it's a cave. It's not a man cave, but it has a little gym in it, and it's got a bed that I can go to and take naps in, and my desk is there, and I have a wood-burning stove there, and I can really just, you know, step out of my life and go down there and accomplish things.
That's really awesome to hear, and it's also fascinating your answers to what a winner and what a loser is, because for those of you listening, this is the 12th episode, and each episode I've asked this question because that's the name of this podcast, and every single guest, every single quote-unquote winner has given a different answer. And so for those of you who are interested, or even you are interested to see what other people say, you can listen to the other episodes of this podcast.
Oh, I will. Absolutely.
And now we're going to be jumping into the section about the restaurant. So I love food. I don't know as much about the operating side and the business side of restaurants. So I'm going to be a nerd here and ask away some questions about owning and operating a restaurant.
Wow. Okay. So what are the questions?
First of all, why Mexican? Is it because of your staff, or like, which one came first? Because when you first bought this restaurant,
it was Greek.
It was Greek.
It was full on Greek.
So how did it happen?
The whole process was very interesting to look back on now. You know, when you enter an entrepreneurial effort, a restaurant, you know, for me is insane. You know, I'm here to tell you, anybody that buys a restaurant, you better change every day. You've got to be malleable. You've got to take on all this different information that comes across, and it's going to, you have to start with a business plan. That business plan has to be about 1/3 creative. It's got to be 1/3 fundamental, and then it's got to be 1/3 fuck it. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, but we're going to keep this boat from floating, from flipping.
Yeah.
It's got to float. It's all about, trying to find calm in the storm, because it's always going to be changing. So, for me, the fundamentals are to always be looking for new things. So to answer your question, why Mexican?
Yeah, why Mexican?
We started out with a Greek coffee shop that served bacon, eggs, pancakes. The eggs all came with home fries. The home fries, these were the people they were very successful in what they did.
Okay.
And what they did was, let's take home fries as an example.
Please.
Their philosophy in 1991, when I came on, was they didn't have the manpower to peel potatoes. So why buy fresh potatoes? Better to buy canned potatoes, open the can, drain them, and throw them on the grill and chop them up with the spatula, okay? Now, to a lot of people, that would sound like you're spending money that you don't have to, but for them, the fundamental was open the can and you got the home fries. I didn't see it that way. But that's where I came from. So my first thing was to move through the product that was in the house. It took a couple of months. Then bring on my programming, which was fresh products. So I started out focusing on fresh. I've tried to make everything as fresh as possible. I wasn't focused on words like sustainability. I wasn't focused on words like local or localism, and nothing wrong with that. It's just I wanted to make it fresh, because that's the way my grandmother did it. That's the way my mother did it. And I was going to bring those principles into the kitchen. Soon after that, I wanted to start a garden. I started asking my guests, what about gardens? I had one customer who I had asked earlier. He had told me to join Quail Hill. I had joined Quail Hill. I loved that. That really got the fresh moving through my kitchen. He came to me 6 months later and he said, Colin, did you find that garden you were looking for? I said, no. And he said, my landlord has a 2-acre parcel that's, 500 yards out your kitchen door, and he would like to see if you want to put a garden in there. It was like a match made in heaven. I had a garden there for 16 years. So we really got into the fresh, and that became a calling card for us. We were in Bon Appetit magazine. I did the Today Show. We were in the New York Times, all about this new idea of farm to table. This is 1993, 94.
So that was brand new back then.
It was brand new back then, and I wasn't doing it because everyone else was doing it. I was doing it because that's what my grandfather did. He was a doctor in Wisconsin, but he had a 1-acre garden behind his house, and my grandmother made the best food I knew of, and so this is a long answer to your question, but it had to start somewhere, and it started with growing my own food. Then I saw this whole words like biodynamic and sustainable and organic, and I was like, I'm just putting seeds in the ground and doing my best, right? So then my father, here's a good one, and this is really the genesis of why we're Mexican today.
Okay, please.
My father, who has always been my guidance counselor, as most men, that have a father that they can count on. He called me one day, and my dad his side boogie was helping people through his office in Chicago. And he spoke Spanish fluently, so he would help Spanish English as a second language was his thing, and people would come into his office for an hour a week, and he would tutor them. And he had this guy, Ruben Bravo, who had been coming to him for a while. And Ruben lived in the worst part of Chicago, a place called Cabrini Green. And he worked at a Chinese restaurant. And one day, and he had been working with my dad for 2 years. And one day, my dad came in, Ruben came into the office, and my dad said, "Ruben, what's wrong?" And he said, "I'm really sick. I'm going to die." And my dad said, "Why?" And he said, "Because the Chinese woman that I work for put a curse on me. And I'm going to die." And my dad said, "No, you know, that's really kind of inappropriate. People shouldn't put a curse on you that you feel, you know, offended by like that." And he goes, "Well, what should I do?" And my dad said, "Well," and he also said, "People shoot guns off in my building and I don't sleep at night." My dad said, "Let's work on that. My son owns a restaurant on Eastern Long Island and he needs some help." This was 1994. I had been here for 2 years. And he said, "I'll tell you what, I'll buy you an airplane ticket and I will send you out there and you can meet him." And so he came out on President's Weekend in 1994, and at that time I had an office behind the restaurant that was about a 400 square foot cottage, and Ruben came and stayed in there, and he liked it, and he did a great job, you know, and his English was just good enough. Well, Ruben worked for me for 28 years, and Ruben brought the flavors of Mexico into my kitchen himself, because he lived in the cottage, but he'd cook his meals, and I'd taste his salsa, and I'd taste the tomatillos that he was using in the sauces. And I finally went, "Wait a minute, let's try something." And so we took the salsa that he made, and we started making a dish called ranch eggs. And you know who named ranch eggs? A huevos ranchero style special. And we had a regular customer named Joseph Heller. Are you familiar with Joseph Heller?
No idea.
I know you do. He's a man that wrote one of the most iconic books of all time called Catch-22.
Oh, good, yes, I do.
And he was a great guy and very soft-spoken man. And he'd come in for breakfast 2 or 3 times a week. And I'd go up to his table and say, "You know, what would you like today, Joe?" And he'd say, "You know, I want those ranch eggs, whatever you call them." So that's what they became named, was ranch eggs. And ranch eggs went onto our menu. They were our first Mexican-influenced dish as we kind of slid out of the Greek coffee shop programming. And we had a fresh pasta program for dinner for a long time. And then slowly we added more things, and we started to make pozole, and we started to make, we did a lot of various taco items as specials. And as the time went by, because Ruben was my henchman in the kitchen, more and more Latinos were coming in to work for me, and most of them were from Mexico, and they were eating this great food during family meal. And I've thought to myself, why am I doing Italian when I've got people that really understand the Latin palate, the Mexican palate?
Yeah.
And that's when we changed the name from Estia to Estia's Cantina on Main Street in Amagansett. And we removed a lot of the basic items on our menu and started to integrate these other things. In 1998, I bought this building, and we opened this building as an American cafe, and then this fellow named Carlos Pinzon walked in the door. And Carlos had leopard hair. He was a punk. He was like a Green Day guy. And he was right off the beach in Acapulco, but he spoke very good English. And I hired Carlos to be a busboy. The reason he spoke good English is because he worked as a runner on the beach in Acapulco. So back then, what may still happen, a restaurant or hotel would be on one side of the road with a beach on the other, and they realized that they could have these kind of like runners, essentially. These guys did not work for the hotel, they were kind of entrepreneurial, so they would have a pocket full of cash. They'd go up to the people on the beach and say, you need a beer? You might want a taco with the beer. Oh, should I get your wife a salad? Yeah, so they go, what? Okay, this is what you want. They'd go to the restaurant, they'd buy it, they'd take it back out, and they'd sell it to the guy on the beach for 20% more, whatever. That's what Carlos did, and most of his customers were Canadian. And so he had to learn English on the beach. Somehow, he made it here to the United States. He found his way to my back door. I have no idea how. He asked me in his phenomenal English if I'd give him a job. And I looked at him and I thought, how can I not?
Yeah.
This guy has more energy than anybody I've met in a long time. Well, Carlos Pinzon worked for me for about 7 years. And I can send you a photograph of Carlos that I'm very proud of.
Can you make an impression of him? Like,
oh my God.
Please.
Well, first of all, Carlos is still here. He works now at Bobby Vance. He's one of their solid players at Bobby Vance.
Does that hurt when someone...
Oh no, I love it. I mean, it hurts when they leave.
Yeah.
And I tried to get Pinzon back a few times. But his time here was done. But he brought Miguelito. He brought Miggy. So Miggy was his friend, and he said, can you help my friend out? Miggy had worked in fine dining in Acapulco. Miggy came in, he was phenomenal. He worked here for about 8 or 10 years. Miggy once said to me, would you hire my sister? Julia runs my dining room today. That was 18 years ago. Julia said to me, would you consider hiring my boyfriend, Raul? Raul's worked here for 16 years. He started as a dishwasher. He ran my kitchen. He now does dinners here and works for Citarella in the daytime. Then I was in, and so it's just all family. Yeah. And it's all from my connection to the Mexican community, who I have all the most respect for.
Yeah.
The people,
I can see that.
The people that work for me have held me up. They've given me the opportunity to grow by running other restaurants while I own this one. I ran the Old Stove Pub in Sagaponack for 2 years. I was the executive sous chef at the Bridge in 2008. These were all opportunities for me to see how other operations ran and bring ideas back here. It also gave me the opportunity as an owner to tread lightly on the cash flow from this small business, pay it off, help it grow, so that eventually I could return here and put more of my financial weight on it. Always having a second job meant that I didn't have to pay myself my full salary out of this business, and I could share it with them. And that was really critical for me as a boss. I was enhancing my understanding of the industry. I was, adding another 10,000 hours every year, every 2 years, whatever it was. I'm a true believer that you really have to continue to polish the stone. You can't go, okay, I'm set. My menu is very similar from the years past, but there's always new specials. There's always new ideas coming in. There's a new tequila rep named Ashley. She's phenomenal. She's helping us build our business. We have some of the best tequilas on the East End now. And I don't drink, so I need that help from the outside. My staff knows how to taste it, but luckily they don't find it's a necessary evil to drink here every day. And they're tasting this tequilas and saying, this is one that we should promote. This is one we need to have, but we don't need to promote. That's how you grow in this world. So we try to hinge on the Mexican profile.
Yeah.
Tequila, pozole, corn tortillas, freshly made salsa.
Yeah.
These are the cores. We have a tomatillo salsa that we make almost every day here. That's a component of our huevos rancheros, and it's our biggest seller.
I like that you take pride in your staff and the Mexican cuisine. Question: has anyone ever given you a hard time being a white guy running a Mexican restaurant?
You know, if they have, I don't dwell on it. Gosh, I can't say so. It might happen behind my back, and I'm cool with that, you know, because I am a white guy. I did not grow up in Mexico. I unfortunately, as a young boy, missed the biggest opportunity of my life, which my father put right in front of me, which was to learn to speak Spanish. I lived in San Juan for 2 years when I was 6 and 7 years old. We left right, you know, right as I was beginning 3rd grade. But my sisters embraced that opportunity. My younger sister is fluent in Spanish now. She raised her child in a Spanish environment in California, so she speaks fluent Spanish. I missed it. And I'm the one now with, you know, 15 Latino employees, and it's a challenge for me that I know that there's conversations that I pick up every 3rd or 4th word, but that's the way my brain works. I'll also admit, I know a lot of my customers, but I don't know all of them. I know what they eat, I know what makes them happy, but I can't walk up to them and greet them by name always. There are a lot that I can. I mean, you know, we serve upwards of, in the summertime, of 4,000 people a week here. And a lot of those people are returning. You know, some of them, you know, my goal is for that family who owns a home in Sag Harbor to come out here and have it set in the car. Let's make sure we get to Estia for at least one meal while we're here. Or when they leave, gosh, Dad, we didn't make it down to Estia for Huevos Rancheros. You know, that means I'm a part of the community. And you know, there's another success winner answer to you, is that we have created something here that if people miss it, they talk about it. And I'm proud of that.
When it comes to your experiences working or running the show in other restaurants, that was very, very interesting. I haven't heard of that. You were the owner of this restaurant, even though you were being employed by other restaurants. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, oh yeah. The first one would have been, well, actually what happened early on, the path that I took was, I was a bartender with extensive knowledge of beverage alcohol management when I bought my first restaurant. But I worked for a culinary grad, Patrick Donahue at Rory's in Darien, Connecticut. And, you know, as it worked out, Patrick never once said to me, Colin, why don't you come and work in the kitchen? Never even occurred to me. There was a time in my life where I would have benefited from going to culinary, but I missed that opportunity. So I had to figure out. What happened was, I bought the restaurant in Amagansett. I met a fellow named Jeff Winter early on. He was looking for a job as a chef. He had been a chef on a yacht in Florida or somewhere, and he was very good with Italian food, and that's what our focus was in the early days. And he ran my dinner business for the first year, and we literally, Joan Remnick from Newsday called me Superman, because I was able to, in her review of the restaurant, she saw that I was able to take a coffee shop that was hardcore bacon, eggs. We had a line out the door all the time because we were the only breakfast operation in Amagansett back in the early 90s. And that's what I bought. And I serviced that crowd with the, you know, the $4 egg and the 85-cent cup of coffee. And she saw that I was able to take that and then completely refashion it every night. Like I got in the phone booth and spun around, and all of a sudden the dining room had linen, and there was waitstaff serving freshly made pastas that had a whole different flavor profile, and we had a wine service, and she called me Superman, and that was a great honor, right? Yeah. So we were able to take that, and then I had to learn to cook because Jeff Winter left my operation. He called me up in March of the next year, and he said, you know what, I'm not going to continue on with you. So I had to go, okay, well, the guy I'm paying the most just quit. And if I find another guy, I'm probably going to have to pay him more. And I'm paying those guys more than I'm making. So I'm going to do that job. And so I faked it for that year or two. I just did what he did, and it worked, you know? And but then we had the zone diet. That was a little bit of a problem. Do you know anything about the zone diet?
No, and this isn't M against it?
Yeah. The zone diet was don't eat any carbs. No carbs. Well, my whole menu was pasta. So I'd start to get people that would call on the phone and say, gosh, we love your restaurant, but Aunt Becky is coming into town and she doesn't eat pasta. She's on the zone diet. We can't come there. So do you have? And I'd be like, well, it's all pasta. It was pasta and salads.
What's a zone diet?
Zone diet was the happening diet in the early 90s. And it was all about, you know, only eating vegetables and protein. No carbs. Okay. And so pasta was out. And so that winter, because of my time at Top Shelf and all these marketing contacts I had, some of those people, because I was getting press, I was in the New York Times, I was getting written about in the Newsday, so some of those people were like, wow, Colin stepped out of the publishing business and he actually is transitioning in the restaurant industry, and he's taking that information. And I think that was inspiring to them. So they'd start to call me and say, hey, we're having an event, would you like to come? One day, I got a phone call from this gal, Wendy Weinstein, who was the marketing director for San Pellegrino, and she and I were friends. And she said, hey, you know, we're having an event at a restaurant in New York. We're helping them get one of their opening nights underway, and we're doing a big event there. Would you like to come? And I said, sure, where am I going? She said, well, it's a restaurant called Danielle. And this was the first Danielle, which was Daniel Boulud, who is now easily one of the world's top 10 chefs. Very impressive guy. Built a wonderful restaurant. He had worked at Le Cirque, and he had kind of become his own boss by opening his own restaurant. He had left Le Cirque, which was, you know, the high temple in New York of cuisine at the time. And I knew all about this, and I said, absolutely. And I said to my wife, Jessica, we got to go to this. And Jessica's like, all right, great. So we went down, and as we approached, Wendy called me and she said, hey, Colin, I just want you to know I'm sitting you at Charlie Palmer's table. And I thought, wow, because Charlie Palmer was the hottest chef in the city at the time. He owned a restaurant called Boreal, and she said, yeah, it'll be, you know, Charlie and his wife are going to be there, and I thought we'd seat them with you. I said, beautiful. And I said to my wife, honey, we're going to be sitting at a table with like 12 or 18 people, and Charlie and Lisa Palmer are going to be there. If you get a chance, get to know Lisa, because these are the kind of people who make things happen, and we have to take this opportunity seriously.
That's smart.
Guess what happened?
What happened?
The four of us at the table. There was no 18 people at this table. It was just Charlie, Lisa, Jessica, and I. And we got to be friends with Charlie and Lisa. And so when Jeff quit, I had to learn how to cook. I just stepped in and just did it for a season. And that fall, I called Charlie and I said, Charlie, I need to learn to be a chef. And he said, no problem, dude, just come in and stage at my restaurant at Oriole whenever you want. You just let us know. And I said, well, I'll be there, you know, Tuesday through Friday, all winter long. He said, cool. So for 4 months, I slept on my friend's couch in New York City. I staged at Oriole. And it was amazing because I was received as a chef because I owned a restaurant, and he gave that to me.
That's awesome.
I did not deserve that at the time. He gave that to me.
Amazing. Wait, so you were under payroll? How did he pay you?
Stagiaire is he's giving me an opportunity.
Oh,
That's how he paid me. So I learned to cook in his kitchen. I watched his staff. I peeled potatoes. I did whatever they asked me to do. One of my best friends is a guy that was the poissonnier, Aaron Bashi. He's still very close friends with me. So anyway, so the answer to your question is, I learned to stage, or stagiaire, through Charlie Palmer's grateful, his hospitality to me. Then I was able to call him the next year and say, that was phenomenal. Can you make an introduction for somewhere else? He says, sure. My buddy Michael Mina has restaurants in San Francisco. I'll tell him you're going to call. Called Mina. I worked at a place called Aqua, which was San Francisco's top restaurant.
Again, no pay.
No pay for a month, doing whatever I was asked to do. I also worked at a place called Charles on Nob Hill in San Francisco, which was under Mina's umbrella. That went well. Then I felt confident enough to now I had some things. So the third year, I reached out to a guy named Fred Eric in LA without Charlie's help, because Charlie had done what I had needed him to do. And Fred said, yeah, come in, and I worked at Vita. Now, Vita had a Thai influence. And so I learned a little bit about Thai food. So every time I'd go to these restaurants, I'd learn something that would then be brought back and assimilated into the Estia style. And today, if you have crab cakes here, we serve it with Vita slaw. I learned to combine Thai chilies with a little bit of anchovy and a little bit of soy sauce, and make essentially a Thai mayonnaise.
Very cool.
And I make my coleslaw for that dish, and I still call it Vita slaw. So these things have become part of the menu lexicon of Estia. So we're not just Mexican, we have other flavors that I picked up along the way. So having done 12 years of stagiaires, I then realized, okay, I'm ready to open up other restaurants, and I will work with other people.
Oh.
And so a fellow named Michael Gluckman, who now owns Bamboo in Southampton, has had many restaurants out here. He was a friend of mine, a regular customer. He was opening a restaurant in a facility in East Hampton, an old, long-standing restaurant that used to be called The Laundry, and he opened a place that was essentially a contemporary steakhouse, and he asked me to be his executive chef, and I was like, yeah, I can do that.
Still no pay?
No, at this point I was full pay. I was the executive chef.
Like under a payroll?
On payroll. I owned this restaurant, and I'd run his restaurant at night, and I'd be here in the daytime. Then that rolled into the next opportunity, which was the Old Stove Pub. I had an opportunity that was introduced to me by one of my purveyors, that they needed an executive, somebody to follow the chef at the Bridge in the country club. I did that. That gave me the confidence that I could buy a restaurant in Connecticut and run 2 restaurants at one time. So it's all a question of using this as my footprint and expanding out and letting the waves ripple out to other operations. And each time I reinforce my confidence with my staff by backing off on my salary, bonuses, helping them as best I can. And, each opportunity benefits all of us.
Is that normal to be a restaurant owner and still work at another restaurant? I just haven't heard of this.
I think that to say that anything is normal for a restaurant owner is not appropriate. There's no normality in what we do. Look at Joe Realmuto and Mark Smith. Are you familiar with them? Well, they're some of the brightest stars in the restaurant world out here. They started with Nick and Tony's,
Love Nick.
And then Tony Ross and her former husband, who's passed away, Jeff Salloway, they bought what was called the Honest Diner in Amagansett. It's now Cuce Commodore. And but Joe and Mark run her enterprise. They have Nick and Tony's, they have Town Line Barbecue, they have La Fondita, they have Cuce Commodore, they had a restaurant, Nick and Tony's in Manhattan. So we are always looking for new opportunities to add to our collection of businesses that are all feeding off of what we started. And I think, David Lowenberg is another good example. David Lowenberg is a phenomenal frontman, and he's been able to team with guys like Sam McClendon, who runs his kitchens. And David and Michael Knowles, Michael Nolan, they run The Beacon they run Bell and Anchor, and they run Fresno. They're all David Lowenberg's brainchilds, but he has partners in each location that take it on as theirs too. And I take inspiration from all of these guys, you know. They all show me that I don't have to be specific to one place in order to be successful, and that as I grow and contract, my staff responds accordingly.
Remind me of the last 2 restaurants that you were paid for to work. I have a question.
Well, I did the Old Stove Pub,
Stove.
that, and then I had the Lodge was the restaurant in East Hampton. That was the big
So I have a
steakhouse.
question. Okay, the Lodge and Old Stove.
Old Stove Pub.
Okay. So
On,
this is-
on Montauk Highway in Sagapon.
This is your time to give advice to people who are entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs. Colin, you worked as an employee at the Lodge and the Old Stove Pub at the same time as you were the owner of your own restaurant. Can you share some advice on people who are having a day job and are thinking about owning their own business? What's a way, or what's the best way, or what's a way to go about that?
I think that the fundamental is make sure that your house is clean. In other words, don't go looking for a second job if you have problems in your existing operation. You've got to make sure that everything's in place, that your systems are all running, that you're cash positive before you start to add on. And that took me 8 years of owning this restaurant before I could look out. And you know what my new favorite show right now is Lost Kitchen. Have you seen it?
Nope.
Oh my God. Aaron French has a restaurant in Maine called the Lost Kitchen. Mansell, my middle child, got a job as a counselor at a camp in Maine one year. This is 7 years ago. I was crowing to my customers about it. Oh my gosh, Mansell got a job. We're so excited. This guy Todd that comes in here, he goes, hey, you're going to Maine?
Yeah.
He goes, your timing is perfect. April 15th, they take phone calls at the Lost Kitchen. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, yeah, this restaurant takes all their reservations in one day for the whole summer. And they're that good. And I said, well, I've got to do it. So I called all day long. And I finally got through. And so we got reservations in July at the Lost Kitchen. Well, it was one of the top 10 meals of my life. I blogged about it. So if you go to the Estia's Little Kitchen website, to the blog, and put Lost Kitchen, and you can read my review or my thoughts about that night. But now, cut to 8 years later, she has a wonderful television show called The Lost Kitchen.
Oh.
And you get to see how she formats each week. It's amazing. She does four nights a week. No one orders anything. She serves 40 people a night, and it's all determined by her menu.
Very cool.
The way she puts food together is off the hook. I'm such a fan, and it's all locally sourced. She introduces you to the farmer. She introduces you to the fisherman, and then you get to see what she does with the ingredients that she brings into her kitchen.
What are some of your favorite cooking shows?
Oh, you know, I love Chef's Table. Now that's going to be, I think, on Netflix. I don't really know, but that it's so beautifully shot. It was my inspiration for starting the American Rivers Tour. Not that I ever thought I could match the craftsmanship that goes into that show, although I sure would like to try. But they have probably a $500,000 budget on each show that they do. It sure looks like it. So the Chef's Table is #1. In terms of beauty and gorgeous photography and whatnot. Lost Kitchen is right up there. I'm not big on the competition stuff because I'm really not a competitive person. Although I have friends. Bobby Flay is a friend of mine. He's made a whole fortune out of that world. And I've met Emeril Lagasse in my time out on the street. And Emeril had a show called can't remember, Emeralds, I think it was. And then Mario Batali, who used to come here when he had a house on the East End, or his in-laws did, he became a friend of mine. And Molto Mario was one of the early shows on the Food Network. And I really got a lot out of those shows back in the 90s when I was really getting my feet wet in the business, because I could watch these guys who were pretty much my age having success in media. And I framed that as a goal for myself. So I would say, more to your question, my influences have been guys like Bobby Flay, Mario Batali, of course, Anthony Bourdain. Anthony Bourdain had the best television show I think ever made about food, because he took it deep and very inspirational. You know, so I do, you know, if you're a chef, you don't go home and just fall asleep. The television is a wonderful thing if you're not going to bars, because you come down slowly. And if you're not going to eat at night, you got to do something. And if you're not drinking, which I don't do anymore, you know, you pour yourself a Fresca and sit in front of the TV and cool down. And these shows are... Menu, that movie that I mentioned, bummed me out crazy. But you know what? It's another example of how the food world has worked its way into the media. It's a story of a chef killing all of his customers. Bummed me out, but I watched the whole thing.
It's still interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the question I had? Oh yes. Do you like Julia Child?
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to. I mean, she started it all, right? Julia Child. Well, Jeffrey Drummond was her producer for a long time, and he's one of my closest friends. He comes to this restaurant all the time. He endorses me privately, which gives me great confidence. We don't do things with toothpicks and you know, micro food here, but when a guy like Jeff Drummond endorses me by giving me his confidence, I know I'm doing the right thing. So yeah, Julia Child. And then an interesting experience I had was, there's a book called Julie and Julia. And that spawned a movie called Julie and Julia. And that was written by a woman named Julie. And Julie had such great success from that. This, I think, was her first book. I've forgotten her last name. But she went on to write a book called Cleaving. And Cleaving, I read right away. I like to read about food. And she wrote a book called Cleaving that was really about butchery. It was about her diving into the butchery world, and she went to Kingston, New York to work at a butcher shop called Fleischer's. And Fleischer's was the new idea of at that time, this was in the mid-2000s, 2006, 2007, Fleischer's was set up as a nose-to-hoof butchery shop. So the fellow that ran it, Appleseed is his name, Applestone, I believe. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He's a great guy, and he came out of veganism because he wanted to serve the best meat, not just any meat. He wanted to be able to source it and tell you what the animal had eaten, and all the story behind the biodynamics, you know, that this was not an animal on feed, this was an animal that was foraging or whatever. So he crafted this butcher shop out of nothing in this low down town called Kingston, New York, which is now popping. It's like Hudson. But back in the early 2000s, this guy created this butcher shop, and he got this guy Hans Siebold to run a tutorial out of the back of the butcher shop where chefs could come and learn how to be butchers. I read Julie's book, was inspired by it enough to go to Applestone, and I learned from him. I went to his,
wow.
I did a 1-week seminar under Hans Siebold. I learned nose to tail butchery. I now apply those skills here for events. I don't do it all the time. It's not part of my core programming, but I now have the skills to take that to a special event, to work on honing those skills all the time. And so that's an example, a very good example, I think, of how media has influenced me. I read a book and I chase the idea to the point where I'm interacting, if not with the people that wrote the book, with the people who the book was about.
We are in the Hamptons, so what is the best and the worst aspects of serving the Hamptons?
Oh, to be honest with you, I've owned restaurants other places, and the Hamptons are not unique. The Hamptons are special. What the best part is the diversity. The diversity here.
Hamptons?
Oh my gosh, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. People from all over the world come here. And I'm lucky you asked about social media. They pay attention to what has been said about a restaurant. And a lot of people say nice things about Estia's Little Kitchen. There are people that get mad, and you know what's great about it is, it's usually about me. They're not getting mad at Julia and Caesar. They're pissed off because the owner wouldn't let them in. That's the way they feel. You know what that is? That's halt. That's hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. It's my job to help them get out of that. A lot of times, those negative reviews are people that didn't give me a chance to do that. They show up on the busiest day when this place is, when we serve 500 people and we only seat 37 at a time. And they want what they want, and they want it now. And when I tell them I can't accommodate that, they go to social media to complain about it. And that's okay, because that's a barometer for me. That gives me an opportunity to see how I might change, or how it's important that I stay the track. Okay, so that's a big thing for me. The Hamptons, though, what's great about the Hamptons is you have so many. It's a melting pot. You know, there is an African American community here that supports us. There's a Jewish community that supports us. There's a Caucasian community. There's a gay community. In Darien, Connecticut, that stuff isn't happening. Everyone looks the same. They all move on the same schedule. For a restaurant, that sucks. For a restaurant, you want all these different communities passing through your door because they have different programming. They eat at different times. The retired community eats at 10 in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or 2. A lot of people come here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to have crab cakes and get a bowl of soup to take home. That's treasure for me. That is not the housewife that's got 3 kids that she's got to pick up at school. That woman might be coming here at 9 o'clock in the morning for a quick bite with her girlfriend. Wonderful. She might bring her kids here on Saturday for pancakes at 8:30, at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then we have these other communities that are heavy on the weekends. And they come, and they're the ones, they don't want to mess their kitchen up. They come out here for 48 hours. They want to know that they can come to Estia and get what they need from us, which is food, but it's also the hug. They want to see Julia and Caesar. They want to feel the warmth of this room. They want to get beyond what's happening on the street. That happens in the Hamptons. It happens in Darien, Connecticut too, but not with the broad scope. So that's what's good about the Hamptons. What's a challenge about the Hamptons is that it's becoming very hard for the people that support me, that live here, to continue to live the lifestyle that they see coming through the door. And the attitudes that come, I almost say, and don't take this the wrong way, but there's some truth to it. The more expensive the car, the bigger the asshole. And I'm sorry to say that publicly, but I kind of feel like the people that are driving the expensive cars out there have to realize that they are not going to get treated here any different than the guy who pulls up in a 1968, pickup truck. Yeah. Or even more example is a K car. I mean, everybody that walks in the door here is going to get the same hug. And they're going to all come in a timely fashion that we can help them the way that we help them. And so the Hamptons it was the best choice I could have ever made. No doubt about that to me. I have all the people in my life that want to come back here. My kids want to come back here. You know, I'm not sure if I lived in Columbus, Ohio, nothing against Columbus, Ohio, that they would be like wanting to bring their friends for the weekend, you know, to this. My kids are proud that their dad is a restaurateur on the East End of Long Island. And I hope everybody's kids are proud of their dad, but that's the piece that works for us, you know.
You call yourself a restaurateur instead of a restaurant owner. What's the difference?
Well, because I do dishes, I do, you know, right now, it's a great example. This weekend, I'm on the dish pit because Maria, who's worked for me for 14 years, is on her vacation. And I don't look around my staff and say, okay, you're on the dish pit. That's a restaurateur. A restaurant owner is a guy who invests in the success of the restaurant and hires other people to do that work. And all the respect to those guys. You know, the best restaurant owner that I know is a guy named Buzzy O'Keefe. Nobody does it better. But Buzzy O'Keefe doesn't roll his sleeves up and walk into the dish pit and say, how can I help?
What makes him good?
Oh, he just knows what he's doing. He's the most powerful restaurant operator in New York City on a day-to-day, boots-on-the-street level. He has the respect of every chef that's ever walked through his door. Not just because he pays on time, but because he has had an influence. Charlie Palmer, he was his first major restaurant owner. Charlie Palmer is probably the most successful restaurateur that I know in the world today. And he worked for Buzzy O'Keefe. Aaron Bashi, one of my closest friends, is not a restaurateur. He's a chef, and he takes pride in his time in Buzzy O'Keefe's kitchens. David Burke worked for Buzzy O'Keefe. Jerry Hayden, one of my great friends who's no longer with us, he owned the North Fork Table and Inn. He worked for Buzzy O'Keefe. So I cannot put myself in the category of a Buzzy O'Keefe or a Peter Morton or an Alan Stillman. These are all guys that came at the restaurant business from a completely different approach. Stillman owns Smith & Wollensky's. Morton owns Morton's. These are national steakhouse chains, and these guys know their meat. They know how to cut deals. They know how to buy wine, but they don't walk into the dining room and service the customer the way that a restaurateur does. They are restaurant owners.
Okay, got it. You came into the restaurant business with a humble $8,000 severance check, and that was enough to propel you into the business. For people who don't really have the money and they want to start a restaurant, what do you have to say to them? What kind of advice can you
Pop up. Don't try it. Don't do what I did. There's no way. It doesn't work like that anymore. This is the millennium, 2023. Everything that's going to snag your boots is going to take you down. You know, if you're so lucky that your grandpa had a deli that has kind of wet use, then you go to work for that grandpa and you show him how much you believe in his concept and you give him the chance to let you put your special powder on his thing, yeah, do that. If you have an investor who's willing to say to you, I'm going to get you through your first 3 years regardless, then you do that. But don't walk into this with $150,000 and a lot of skill and think that you're going to be able to cover payroll, that you're going to be able to interact with insurance companies. I've been paying for insurance for 32 years, and I have never had an insurance company send me a check. I've had people throw bottles through my windows. I've had floods shut me down for 6 days. I've had all kinds of... My restaurant in Darien, Connecticut, I was up in the first 5 months, I had $50,000 in my bank account. That was all the result of cash flow from the business. Sandy came along, Hurricane Sandy, shut my business down for 6 days. I reopened, cleared my bank account. Thank God I wasn't taking that money and spending it on new glassware or anything. That's how hard this is, and that's a restaurateur that had been in place for 20 years. If I had been a neophyte, that money wouldn't have been there. You have to learn to make every dollar work for you for at least 5 years before you even start paying yourself what you think you're valued at. That was very hard for my wife. Not everybody can pull that off. I was lucky because I was in a position, I had family support. I got through the winters by going to people like Charlie Palmer and saying, I need to learn from you. While I had a diner that was, banking $700-800 a day to pay the staff. I never had to restaff. So if you have the good fortune of grandpa with a deli in Bensonhurst, or your uncle with a steakhouse in Hampton Bays, work for that guy until you prove yourself to him. Don't put yourself over him. Look at his challenges. Find the strengths in his operation and work off of those. But to walk into this, Ileana Reagan in my podcast put it to me, in American Rivers Tour film that's coming out this week, I asked her the same question, and she said, just don't do it. She said, be creative in whatever you can. But she said, the funny thing is, Colin, the reality is, no one's going to listen to that. And that's what's the beauty of the restaurant business. The guys that want to do it are going to do it. They're going to do it their way, and they're going to rise or fall. And each time you fall, you learn more, so that the next time you try, you're not going to make those mistakes again. And that's really what this is all about. This is all about getting smacked in the face and thanking the person that's smacking you.
What kind of business ideas or business ways, what kind of business creative strategies can people do or have you done where you didn't have the money at one point and you still made it work?
Well, I think that pasta shorts is probably my best example. I needed to do something to fill that room in the wintertime in the early 90s. And we came up with this idea of what do my customers have that I can help them with, which was short films. And we started showing their films, and they brought their friends because they wanted their friends to see this cool thing. So creative programming in any way that you can do it. If you have a big piece of land behind your restaurant and you can till it and make compost for it, don't buy the compost. You got to make it. There's energy in that. And I know it because I see the variety of birds and animals that work their way through here. Creative programming comes from your toes. It's not something that you can say, I'm going to do this, this, and this and be successful. What you're going to do is another thing you got to do is write a business plan. Because there's nothing more gratifying than writing a business plan, executing the business, and being able to sit back 3 years later, read that plan and go, wow, we did this, it worked. We did these 3 things, they were stupid, they didn't work, but look at our numbers. We hit our numbers.
Amazing.
Phenomenal. Without trying, you don't get to have that experience. So I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just saying be really cautious, make sure that you've got backing to get through the fast water. This is just like a river. You get in that river and you start to float and it feels pretty good, but you always start in flat water. You don't hit the rapids until you're comfortable in your canoe. Those rapids are going to test you. They're going to flip your canoe, and if you know how to get it back up and empty it out and get back on the river, God bless you. Just don't get stuck in the backwash because it's very uncomfortable.
I love that. That's a great reference tying in into your show, the American Rivers Tour. What kind of elements are essential for a business strategy?
Okay. Essential for a business strategy. Show great respect to your people. Build a team that you can rely on. That's fundamental. Okay? That takes time. Pay them better than you pay yourself until you have enough money to pay yourself well. That's critical. Don't go into this business thinking you're going to make money until you get to a point where you've got all of the people behind you happy. Because that's the only way you're going to make any money. I think, another great restaurateur who's been here and restaurant owner I'm sorry. Restaurateur would be Michael Romano, chef. Restaurant owner would be Danny Meyer, his boss, the guy who started the Union Cafe group. Union Square Cafe, Gotham Bar and Grill, Blue Smoke. Those guys all built their businesses on their staff. They made sure that everybody in their house understood their philosophy, executed the way they wanted, and came in as happy as they could. Fundamental staffing. Secondarily is finance. You've got to make sure that you've got the backing to get through the first 3 years, because it's not going to be a cakewalk. And if it is, pay your investors back and then move forward. Don't start moving forward until the fundamentals are taken care of. So many people get all caught up in what they're doing and they forget about how important the number one operation is. They don't pay that off. They go into another operation and they have all these resentments from the people that helped them get started. Resentments can burn the house down. So you don't want that. And the other fundamentals are, in the restaurant business, always never walk in the door of your restaurant busy. Always walk in the door of your restaurant, put your nose in the air, and listen. The answers will take care of themselves. If there's a problem, you're either going to smell it or hear it. Then you might taste it. But if you haven't smelled it or heard it, you don't give yourself time to taste it. So don't ever walk in the restaurant with other concerns. Provide yourself with the opportunity to be of service to your staff by recognizing problems and making them go away without making that their problem. That's what I always try to do. I'm not always successful at it. But nose in the air and listen, because if the music's not right, it's up to the owner, restaurateur to deal with it. If there's a problem with septic, your customers know it, your staff doesn't have time to know it because they're so focused on serving the customer. These are all elements of management that come into play in this business because we're all about the senses. We're all about, are the lights right? You know that the minute you walk in the door. And if you don't deal with it, no one else is going to.
That's brilliant and thorough. Thank you, Colin, for sharing. And I wonder now, when you were doing media, one of the most popular magazines, and also when you are currently doing your American Rivers tour, did you have a business strategy or a business plan for those media projects as well?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Top Shelf was thought out well in advance. Top Shelf, we were the first media group to use the Freedom of Information Act. So that was the fundamental component. To be able to go to advertisers and say we have the eyes of 360,000 bar and restaurant owners, that was the strategy, and it was written out. Our costs we knew what a print run cost. We knew how much it was going to cost to write 12 articles. All of that kind of thing was thought out. I was not so involved in that. I was 25 years old at that point. But I got a chance to watch my bosses do that, the guys that funded the magazine. And I was a minion. I was out selling, but I was bringing something because I could talk to the advertising groups. I would go into advertising agencies. I would go into Carillon and Shipland Somerset and all these big marketing and importing companies and talk about what it's like to be behind the bar. And the bartender is the frontline industry for those guys. So I brought something to the table. In the restaurants, again, it started out with my first business plan came out of the magazine that I worked at the time called Connoisseur. They had written an article. I worked for them for 9 months, but the article was about Nick and Tony's. And the article gave me demographics. It told me about what's happening in the Hamptons. And I went, well, hey, I've got a foothold in the Hamptons because I can stay at my in-laws' house. I'm going to go and see what's out there. And I found a restaurant that I tried to buy the property and I couldn't do it. And I went back and then I went to work for Interview for a little while, for 6 months. But I had that business plan. And when it came time for me to do something, I pulled that business plan out. I went to that landowner and he goes, you know what? The opportunity just presented itself. That's God at work in my life. He said, you've already been to me. I've done my due diligence on you. I've approved you. The owner of the business that you're inquiring about came to me last week and her husband had a stroke. She wants to get out. I will make the introduction to you. So I had a business plan. It was called the Pasta Zone. I wanted to put a pasta restaurant into this Main Street restaurant space. And I wasn't thinking about breakfast and lunch. I had a dinner business plan. I executed that dinner business plan, but what I bought was a luncheonette that did breakfast and lunch, and that's the power in my business today. So you don't know what's going to happen, but if you don't have a fundamental plan, you're not going to really walk into anything. You got to be able to say to people, they call it the elevator pitch, and I don't know if it's really fair to try to sell yourself in the time that you can go from the first to the fourth floor. But the reality is, if you can at least say, yeah, I'm going to put a pasta machine in the middle of an 1,800 square foot restaurant and make everybody ask, what is that? That's what I wanted to do.
Did you do it?
I did it. And I created a wholesale business. I sold pasta to all the restaurants out here for the first 3 years because I had to pay for that machine.
This is where?
Estia and Ambrose. Yeah, it began as and that pasta machine is still here. My children had a pasta business called the A Sisters Food Company, and they sold pasta at all of the farmers markets out here for 5 years. And they had a lemonade line called Limonade, and they made their own fresh lemonade with strawberries and blueberries. And they once said to me, Dad, we don't like these plastic bottles that we're using. What do we do? And I said, well, I'll introduce you to Christian Wolfer. Christian has a tasting room on Montauk Highway, and they pour a ton of rosé and they throw those bottles away. So if you go to him and ask him if he'll hold on to those bottles for you, I bet he will. So my kids at the age of 9, 12, and 15 learned to walk into a business owner's office, ask for help. He, of course, he was bowled over. He loved it. Of course, for the next couple of years, he took responsibility for it by saying, well, they're only successful because I give, and that was great. Christian Wolfer was one of my heroes, and that's how the A Sisters Food Company really, and you know what? Those kids all wrote their college entry essays on their experience as entrepreneurs selling pasta in farmers markets on the East End of Long Island.
Wow. Do you have an opinion on 9-to-5ers and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, that song was on the radio this morning, working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living. I don't know that is actually making a living. That's working. I don't work 9 to 5. I mean, some days I don't work at all. But when I'm not working, you know what I'm doing? I'm fishing. And I'm thinking about how I'm going to improve my business. I'm thinking about how I'm going to catch the fish or how I'm going to cook the fish. There's a grain of salt in everything I do that comes back to the business. And so I never was comfortable. My dad said to me once, what are you going to do? And I said, Dad, I can tell you one thing. I don't want to have a desk and put on a tie. And I have actually managed to succeed at that. Yeah.
I had a similar thought before, like this idea of an office job just didn't make sense for me. And I've done like brainless jobs in order to support my film and media jobs until I don't have to anymore. I did lots of like just jobs that doesn't involve thinking too much, so I can save my thinking for my media stuff. Sure.
Well, it all can, again, it's the 10,000 hours. It's how you put your time in from the moment that your eyes open in the morning until you close them at night. And it's about what you watch on TV. It's about what you listen to on podcasts. It's about how you find peace in yourself. Meditation. For the first year in Darien, I used to sit on the back steps before service and I'd meditate for 10 minutes just to find some clarity, so that I wasn't walking into the room with my energy that was created by concern and anxiety. I went in with great to see you. That doesn't come from anxious feelings.
Energy is so important.
Yeah.
And a question that I ask all of my guests is, I have a couple questions that I ask every guest. And one of them is, if you're not doing this right now, what would you be doing?
Whew. Well, my wife would like me to be on the golf course. So I'm kind of at an interesting place in my life right now where I need to either start a new business, get harder into the American Rivers Tour, or go play golf. And I'd love to be with her, and I'm just not sure I'm ready to play golf. In terms of professional pursuits, I'm really interested in diving hard into the vegetarian community's thinking. I'm a big fan of Rich Roll, and he preaches vegetarianism, he preaches veganism, and I have successful runs at that. However, I've not been able to lock down on it and make it my world, but I feel better when I restrict my diet to plants and vegetables, grains, a little bit of dairy, but as little as possible. So that's kind of the horizon that I'm looking to find myself in now. I'm not sure how that's going to happen. I've applied it here as best I can, and I continue to try to come up with new things, because my staff is interested in expanding the menu and offering new things. And I find that we have a lot of customers that are walking through the door and that are going to the vegetarian options. So that's kind of where my horizon is. I don't know whether it's going to be on the table, in the garden, in a jar. I'm not sure where it's going to come from. But lifestyle-wise, that's where I'm headed.
What are your future dreams for both you and your business?
Well, my dream is to stay consistent, to be there for my staff. My dream is to find new horizons that offer me the opportunity to learn. I want to stay in clean environments. I'm really not interested in cities. I loved my experience in Darien, but it was a little too homogenous. So if I have an opportunity to do something in another kind of open air environment, I'm gonna go after that. But I'm not sure. The American Rivers Tour is the ultimate open air environment for me. It really is. There's nothing like being on a river, for me. There's nothing like being on a river in a guide's float boat. So I'm under the watchful eye of a guy who does that river better than anyone else. Oh. He knows what the fish eat on that river. He knows how to present to them, and he shares that information with them, with me. And when we have success, it's beyond. But I can tell you this, I also appreciate the days where we don't catch fish, because I get to know them. These are men that I have not yet fished with a woman. I'm hoping to, but these are men that bring a great deal to my life. I met a guy named Dionisio Gomez in Utah. I spent 2 days with this guy. We had a lot in common, and he taught me how to fish a river that I had lived on in my college years and catch cutthroat trout one after another. And if I didn't spend the day on that river, I could have gone to that river for 2 weeks and not had the success I had in one day. I got it because he gave me his time, and he shared his interests and his intuitiveness with me. And that's what I get when I fish with guides. So the American Rivers Tour is really about sharing people like that with the general public, because they don't even know they exist.
Very cool. Something that I don't hear talked about often is this fishing fellowship. How does that develop? So you're fishing here and he's fishing there.
No, he's not fishing.
Oh.
He's helping me. He's guiding me. Oh, when I go out with another guy, that's a different story.
Do you meet people fishing?
Yeah.
So how does that work?
I call them. I do the research. If I'm going to go to the Missouri River in Craig, Montana, I'm not just going to show up there myself. If I was going to go there for a month, I would hire a guide, fish that guide for a day or two, and learn what's going on that river. Learn about the way the river moves, learn about what the fish are moving on, where the fish hold, and then I'll go out and fish that river by myself. But you know what, Lulu? My life doesn't allow that. I don't have 5, 10, 12 days to go to one place and hang out. So when I save my money and I think about that, now I've got a place where I'm going there in 3 months. I find a shop that specializes in trout on that river. I say, do you guys have a guide you can introduce me to? Oh yeah, Ben, he's gonna be great. Ben has a boat that I don't have to own. He has coffee in his thermos that he's going to share with me. He's got a box full of flies, and if I lose a few, he doesn't mind. He has the right rod, because in fly fishing, they go from very light rods that you catch little tiny trout with, like what would be called a 2 or 3 weight, to a 12 weight, which you catch a tarpon with. Okay, and those guys have that gear, so I don't have to buy it all.
Wow.
So I spend $500-600 with a guy to take me. That sounds like a lot of money, but if I wanted to buy all the equipment, it would be $20. So they're offering to share their world with me for really. I mean, they're driving their truck to get there. They've invested $20,000-$30,000 to get me on the water. They're really not making any money.
And the wisdom, knowledge is invaluable.
Unreal. And you know what? It goes beyond fishing. You know, one guy, I fished with this guy in Harris was his last name, on the Teton River in Idaho. And we're driving along, and I said, where do you go to school? And he said, oh, I graduated from Sewanee 2 years ago. I said, you're kidding me. My daughter is at Sewanee right now. He said, what's her name? I said, Mansell Ambrose. He goes, Henry Beveridge is her boyfriend. Oh, I've known Henry for 10 years.
Wow.
You know, so that's the way it works, is I meet people out there. Another girl, Eliza Chapman, I fished on a river in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. I have fished with a woman now, I can say that.
Okay, good.
Eliza Chapman. Okay, so I'm interviewing her at lunch on camera for the American Rivers Tour. Camera turns off. She says, hey, I noticed it says Sag Harbor on your hat. I go, yeah, I'm from Sag Harbor. I own a restaurant there. She goes, oh, okay. 10 minutes later, and this is how her brain works, very quiet person, excellent fishing guide. She says, hey, I noticed on the form that I filled out that the name of your company is Lyman Trip. I said, yeah, it's named after my family, my daughter. And she goes, I know a girl named Lyman Ambrose. Do you know her? I said, yes, that's my oldest daughter. I am deep in the mountains in Wyoming with a woman that I've never met before. And she knows my kid because she went to school with my daughter's best friend and had been to a party in Maine 5 years earlier.
Wow.
And those are the connections that we make. And if we don't go out on the road, we miss those opportunities. Can't do that. You got to get outside of yourself. You know, you got to have a side boogie. I try to tell my kids, don't work on your job 24/7. Work on your job 16 hours a day, but for those other 8 hours, at least read a book that's going to make you a better gardener or golfer or artist or whatever it is. You've got to dig into what makes you happy at least once a day, even if it's just watching listening to a podcast or watching a movie, reading a book, walking on the beach looking for shells, whatever it is. Become an expert in something else.
That's sound advice. So for you, if you had the opportunity of having, and you can think about this before answering, like having a huge billboard in the middle of the most, I don't know, the busiest spot in the world where the most amount of people will see it. You can put anything you want on the billboard, whether it's a picture, a word, a sentence, and it's so big and a lot of people will see it. What will you put there?
Wow. You know, you know what I think I'd have to put is learn to make compound butter with Denicio Gomez on the American Rivers Tour. So AmericanRiversTour.com, but it's really Denicio Gomez. Go and find his story. on my site and get passionate about it. Join me on the next American Rivers trip. My goal is to share Dionisio and people like him with the world. And I don't know if I'm doing it right, but you know what? If I can get a production company behind me that'll bring in people like you, people that are not just getting paid to do it, but are passionate about it.
Oh yeah.
And that have the skills. That's my goal. And I don't know exactly how I'm going to get there, but I'm giving God a chance to dip into my life and show me.
That's super positive. And I heard that, you have to love what you do so much that you would pay to do it. You would pay to be able to do it.
Yeah.
I would pay to be able to make podcasts and interview people and finding out more about different areas. Like for instance, talking with you today, it ran a little bit longer than normal because of how passionate you are about fishing and how much I learned about fishing and the restaurant business, which I wouldn't have tapped in if I hadn't had you on my show as a guest. And to summarize and to actually finish up in a fun note, golfing is also one of your hobbies, you said?
I do like to play golf. My wife is an excellent golfer.
Oh, okay.
My wife would like me to be on the golf course a lot more than I allow myself to be. It's just, I'd rather have a fly rod in my hand. But I do love to play golf.
So, patience. You need patience for both golfing and for fishing. What's the differences and similarities in both?
It's funny. The similarities are the guidance piece. Because my world involves a caddy most of the time. I'm lucky in that regard. I'm blessed that I get to play at places that require you to have a caddy. The caddies are very helpful. I know the caddies take strokes off my game. In the same way that I know when I go fishing with a guide that I do much better, I have a much better experience. Okay. The difference is I don't really bum out when I get skunked. When I go fishing and don't catch any fish, I get to float that river. I get to meet that guide. I'm going to start a fire and cook over the fire. The best example is that Teton River float. I mean, we caught a shitload of fish, but that was phenomenal. But I got to cook a beautiful meal for the guys with me. When I go golfing, I don't know what it is. I think that these are both very privileged experiences, but I'm more comfortable on the river than I am on the golf course. Golf courses are gorgeous. They're manicured. I don't have a problem with that, but it is what it is. Rivers are not manicured. And there's something about the raw nature that I thrive in. But I wouldn't play golf if it wasn't for my wife, and I really enjoy golf, especially with her. She really, we let the rest of the world kind of fade away when we're on the golf course, and I don't spend enough time with her doing it, and that's my bad.
Thank you so much, Colin, for coming on my show and
pleasure.
Sharing so much of you. I can understand now what you mean that, your brain is programmed in a way that it works and functions better when you're juggling 6 balls. And it makes sense because even when you're talking about different aspects of your life, different subjects, it makes sense. You're a man who just can do a lot of things and are excelling at doing many things. For the people who are listening and watching this podcast, I will link everything below, such as the American Rivers tour, such as
Dionisio Gomez.
Dionisio,
I love it.
I'll link that, and I'll link the Estia's website and social media for sure. By the way, I say Estia's because that's the first part of the Estia's location. Is it Estia or Estia's? Because now it's
Estia's. It's Estia's. Okay. Yes, and because Estia was the original, and this was a byproduct of that restaurant. So now it's Estia's Little Kitchen. People often ask me whether it's Estia or Estia, and I just say I really don't care as long as you're talking about us. We're happy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great to be with you. It's lunchtime, so our timing's perfect. We're going to open up this room to the customers who are hungry for Mexican sweet corn soup.
What's your favorite dish here?
I love the Mexican sweet corn chowder. I also like the Oaxacan seafood stew that we do. It's wonderful. Huevos rancheros. Embarcadero is a dish that we do that's filled with cheese and salsa and then topped with andouille sausage and eggs. So we've got a lot of good ones here. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Colin. You did great. Amazing. I
Appreciate it.
can tell you did it like many times. Give me 1 minute. I'm just gonna take a pen to get some details down, so this will be easier for me to edit from the edit.
Okay.
So,
Am I taking this off?
no, keep it on.
Keep it on,
One minute.
okay.
So I'll take it off for you in like 2 minutes. So you bought the Greek restaurant in which year?
91.
1991, and it was from Tony. You said?
No,
this
that
is
was from Eva Rosas. EVA
yeah.
Rosas. ROZOS. And that was John Pappas's owner.
Okay, so
John Pappas was her nephew, and he was the grill man.
Oh, so back then John Pappas still existed?
No, they used the money from
Oh.
I bought their restaurant,
Yeah.
and they moved to John Pappas.
And their name was John Pappas. What was their?
Well, John Pappas was her nephew's name. So she invested in her nephew
Yeah.
to open his restaurant,
God,
which is now called John Pappas.
what was her restaurant's name?
Estia.
Oh, so you took the name too?
I got the name. They didn't take the name Estia to
Oh,
East Hampton.
Got it. So it was Estia to begin with, and you didn't have to.
Yeah.
It's a good name. I thought maybe I didn't know. I thought because it was Mexican, maybe it was a Spanish girl's name.
Yeah, no. Well, that's good. It worked, didn't it? It transitioned.